Welcome to the Biology Bunker with Professor Carafit. Bio 2 here. We're continuing our lecture on the vertebrates, and we're going to wrap it up, I think, today on this particular video. We left off with the transitional form of Archaeopteryx, a kind of bird, kind of dinosaur thing. We're going to talk about birds today now. Birds are basically just evolved dinosaurs. They're modified dinosaurs. How are they different than dinosaurs? Well, one of the major things is they don't have teeth. If you remember back to our examples of atavisms, they do have the genes for teeth. They still have those genes. Chickens can have teeth in the when they're in the egg. Those chickens usually don't develop, but they can. They do have the genes for teeth that can turn on. Feathers are basically just modified scales, and dinosaurs, many of them we now know had feathers. Birds are endothermic, so probably dinosaurs were too, or at least some of them. It's hard to tell. And birds, like crocodiles and like crocodilians, and probably like dinosaurs, also had a four-chambered heart. So in most of the reptiles, you have a three-chambered heart, and kind of like in we talked about this before. They have a three-chambered heart, kind of like excuse me, kind of like the amphibians, but reptiles have a septum, a wall that divides their heart partially to help prevent the mixing of oxygen-poor and rich blood. It gets a little bit bigger in the reptiles, and then when we hit the birds, it's a full wall separating the two sides into four chambers, so two atria and two ventricles. And those two ventricles allow them to control blood pressure more thoroughly and things like that, and prevent the mixing of oxygen-poor and rich blood. Now feathers, they're developed from reptile scales, so they're made out of the same thing, keratin. We have keratin also in our skin because our skin is derived from reptile skin. Basically, they're really cool, heavily surfaced area structures that really can either be used for insulative purposes, for air insulation, and they also are good at catching the air when the bird flaps its wings, allowing for flight. I'm not going to test you on the structure of a feather, other than I'd like you to know they're made of keratin and are homologous with reptile scales. The bones of birds are modified for flight. So remember, when I'm saying these things, I'm saying them because they are things you might list down. Like, what are the characteristics of a bird? Well, they have feathers. They don't have they don't have toothy jaws. They have beaks. They have hollow bones. Hollow bones that can help save weight. And they're still pretty strong, but that makes it more and more likely the bird can fly. And here we can see the arm bones of a bird homologous to your arms, except the fingers here stay in the wing. They don't stick out like in some of those dinosaurs. They're retained inside of that wing. So here we can see the amniotes, basically. So the ancestral amniote down here, we have all the dinosaurs and the reptiles that have evolved. Here's the snakes and things, and we can see that early on, way down here, early on, we have a branch called the synapsids, which were related to the reptiles. They're often called synapsid reptiles, but they're a very distant branch of reptiles that led to the mammals. Whereas reptiles, we can see up here, are more closely related to each other than they are to the mammals. So there's a true clade of reptiles that includes the birds, and then a separate clade of the mammals. So remember, some of these are endotherms. So this group is endothermic, right? And we know this group right here is endothermic. I would assume that at least these dinosaurs were endothermic as well, but without a time machine, I can't tell you for sure. So, class Mammalia. We evolved from synapsid ancestors, so this branch of the reptile, like cousin of the reptiles, called synapsids. Okay, and they first appear in the Jurassic, so that's the beginning of the Mesozoic. Well, it's sort of the middle of the Mesozoic. Let me rephrase that. That's when mammals appear. Okay, so let me be clear on what I'm saying. Synapsids appear earlier than that. They appear in the Paleozoic, but mammals appear in the Jurassic, and they were small rat-like things like this one here, pretty small critters that were living at the time of the dinosaurs, but they weren't dominant at the time. They lived underground, probably kind of like little mice or little moles. Now, like I said, we evolved from synapsid ancestors. So what does that mean? Well, turtles are anapsids. Okay, anapsids. Anapsid means no hole in their skull. So they have eyes. They have a hole for the eye and a hole for the nose. Those don't count. We're talking about other holes, like where maybe nerves run in and out of the skull or something like that. They don't have that back here. Synapsids have one hole in the skull. Synapsids, and that includes things like Dimetrodon, this cool Paleozoic synapsid creature, not a dinosaur, but this synapsid thing that has a big, sail on its back. That's a synapsid, and so are you. You are a synapsid. I am a synapsid. The diapsids are a branch of the modern reptiles that include the dinosaurs. They have two holes in their skull back here. Diapsids. That's where that di comes from. Diapsids. So synapsids, like ourselves, have one of those openings. Diapsids have two. And so we are not closely related to dinosaurs. There's an example of an ancient fossil showing that simple, they call it a temporal opening. Temporal opening, you can see it right there. And you can see that same opening right here in a human being. So we have that opening as well. So what makes us mammals? So we know we're synapses, but what makes us a mammal? Well, hair, also composed of keratin, just like reptile scales, just like bird feathers. That's because we're related. We are endothermic. Of course, we have a four-chambered heart as well. And where we get our name, mammals, we have mammary glands. We can produce milk to feed our young. Okay, I'm sure you're familiar with that. Okay, there's a lot of diversity within the Mammalia. The most basal group, almost the kind of like the outgroup of mammals, is the monotremes, the monotremata, followed by the marsupials. You can see there's 5 species of monotremes, 324 of marsupials, and then the Eutherians. That's an important clade to be familiar with. The Eutherians, or also known as the placental mammals, they have at least 5,000 species. So we are in the group that have a placenta that have the most abundant numbers of species. But let's talk about monotremes because they're awesome. Monotremes are now only found in Australia. They used to be found around the world, but went extinct everywhere but in Australia. They are still egg layers. They still have that reptilian characteristic. They lay hard-shelled amniotic eggs. You can see a picture here. This is a coin, an Australian coin about the size, I believe, of a quarter. They have very small eggs. They hatch into very small young. Monotremes also do not have nipples. Instead, they have like sweat glands on their belly, their abdomen, and milk seeps out of that and the young lick it off the fur. So they don't have nipples and they lay eggs. You can see this includes 2 major groups, the duck-billed platypus, seen here, and this one's known as an echidna. I'm sure I can butcher the spelling of that for you. Something like this, echidna, okay, and you can spell platypus yourself. Okay, another branch of the mammals that also used to be found all around the world, but Australia kind of drifted off from the rest of the world, and placental mammals didn't evolve there, but they did evolve in the rest of the world. So placental mammals didn't make it to Australia until humans arrived. And so every mammal on Australia was a marsupial until then. And so marsupials are an early branch of the mammal group. And what's weird about them is they do kind of have a placenta, but the young are born in a very immature condition, meaning they're very small when they're born. They crawl to a pouch, and then in that pouch are the nipples, and they attach to a nipple, and they continue to develop. So look at the size of this baby kangaroo, right? That is a penny. These things are born when they're just tiny embryos. They're born as tiny embryos, and then they wiggle to the pouch. It's not the most efficient way to do this because they fall off all the time and die. So mortality rates are probably pretty darn high for this group, but they crawl in, they latch onto a nipple, and this of course includes the kangaroos and the extinct Tasmanian tiger, a really cool species that I wish we hadn't wiped out because it's awesome. So meet our native marsupial, the opossum. Opossums are found in North America, whereas possums are found in South America. Now let me show you, first of all, they have a pouch where the young crawl. You can see that there. And look at where marsupials are found today. They're found in North, Central, and South America, and they're found in Australia. And most of their diversity, of course, is in Australia. Now, Eutherian mammals or placental mammals, they are the most diverse group today with over 5,000 species. So what happens with us? What's different than the marsupials? Well, our embryos stay within the womb a lot longer and develop a lot longer, and we are nourished by the presence of this placenta, which is kind of the interface between mom and baby, where there's tons of surface area, tons of blood vessels, lots of transfer of waste from the baby to mom so mom can get rid of it, and lots of food coming in for the baby. Here's a picture of my son, Charlie, in the womb. He's 3.5 now, but it's pretty cool to see. You can see his foot right there sticking out. So the placental mammals are quite diverse. Here we can see the monotremes right there, right? And you can see over here the marsupials, but everybody else up here are different orders of mammals. We're not going to learn all those today, but there's a lot of them. So the placental mammals, of course, produce milk, and now, they've developed nipples for that, just like the marsupials. They have live birth, right? That's a major thing. They carry the young longer, so the young have a better chance of survival after being born. Now, one of the orders inside of this group of mammals are the primates. Okay, and we're included in that order. Now, here's a picture I took at the Little Rock Zoo. I did not take the cool one with the hand, but you can see the chimpanzee hand next to the human hand there. So things that unite us: thumbs, forward-facing eyes, a shortened face so we don't have real long jaws, right? And complex social behavior. These are things found in the primates. So if we look at a cladogram, we can see the first primate down here, and New World monkeys, Old World monkeys, different groups like that. But more importantly, as we move up the cladogram here, in the orange box, we have the apes, which includes us. And then within the apes, we have a box that includes gorillas, chimpanzees, humans, extinct and living species, and those are the hominids. Okay, so modern humans don't really show up till like about 1 million years ago or so, right? And we split from our common ancestor with chimpanzees, 8 or so million years ago. So it's been a while since we shared a common ancestor with them. But if we look here, we can see some of this group here: the gibbons, orangutans, chimpanzees, bonobos, all of which I'm sure are somewhat familiar to you. But what makes us different from them? Well, we have one, bipedalism, which can be temporarily taken on by chimpanzees, but not for long periods of time. Bipedalism, we have larger brains for body size, and of course some of this is we don't think they can do these things. Maybe they can in some sense, but symbolic thought, like we can think in symbols, like letters or drawings, things like that. Artistic expression, something we don't see really done much in the animal world. And the manufacture and use of tools, and I should add complex tools. A chimpanzee can, get a stick and steal some, and eat some ants with it or something, but to manufacture a flint knife or something, that's only seen in humans, and not necessarily our species. There were other types of humans a long time ago that could do these things, but they're all extinct now. Reduced jaw muscles and bones make us more human. We don't have quite the musculature and the same jaws as the others. We have that childlike morphology, the paedomorphic way we develop. We have that look about us. We remember that paedomorphic thing we mentioned, where the genes, the development changes, and we have the childlike features. We look more like a big chimpanzee child than we do a chimpanzee adult, right? What's cool is the human genome is 99% similar to a chimpanzee's, but there are some really important differences. Humans and chimps differ in the expression of 19 regulatory genes, and those can have a huge impact because they change the order at which other genes turn on and off during development. So that can have a huge impact on how you look, how you develop. And then within humanity, if you compare different humans, our genome is only 0.1% different. So 1% different between humans and chimps, and 0.1% different between different humans. So we're pretty similar in our DNA as a species. Now what's cool is if we move up here, so hominids were things like chimpanzees and humans and that group. But hominins are fossils that are more closely related to humans than chimpanzees, and we know of at least 20 kinds. So hominins, those are species more closely related to us than to chimpanzees. So if we drew a cladogram, you know, this is a bad cladogram, but let's say there's chimpanzees, and let's just say right here is humans. These are species that evolved after the split from chimpanzees. So they're more related to us than they are to the chimpanzee. And they originate, based on the best evidence, they originate in Africa 6 to 7 million years ago is when these hominids show up, so when we split from the chimpanzees. And we see an interesting thing, not what we expected to see. We see evidence of small brains at first and increasing bipedalism. Okay, so what we thought we'd find were fossils of humans getting bigger and bigger brains and maybe walking upright, right? But what we see instead is small-brained hominins walking upright, and they still have small brains, but they're walking upright, and then later their brains get bigger. We can see a bunch of the fossils here. This is showing you millions of years ago and when they lived. So if we look, here's Homo sapiens. That's us right now, right? We're the only ones still around, but we shared the world for a while with Homo neanderthalis, and we probably shared it with Homo ergaster here. So we were around at the same time as some of these other species of humans. So that would have been, imagine how different life would be if there were more than one species of human walking around, how we would think of ourselves differently. And we did. That was the case. Our ancestors shared the earth with Homo neanderthalis, the Neanderthals back in the day. So some of these early hominins we can see 3.5 million years ago. Here's Australopithecus afarensis, an artist's reconstruction of what they look like. We found their fossils. We found some of their tool-like structures. We found their footprints fossilized. I believe this includes the famous fossil known as Lucy that you may have heard of. I can't write with my mouse. I should get my pad out, but that's okay. Now, I want to point out a common misconception that people have, that humans evolved from chimpanzees. That's not true. We share a common ancestor with chimpanzees. Okay, so the misconception arises, and I'm sorry this is covered up, but from the idea that evolution is a ladder. This is this misconception, and that somehow humans are the bestest at the top, right? And chimpanzees are down here somewhere, and all other life was, evolving towards being human. Humans are not a goal of evolution. We're just one of the many branches on a tree, right? And we share a branch with chimpanzees. We didn't evolve from chimpanzees. We share a common ancestor with them. That's the important thing to know. So modern humans, here we are, modern humans on this tree right here. Over here, chimpanzees are on here too, but they're over here, right? We didn't evolve from that branch. We share a common ancestor with that branch. So evolution is not a ladder leading to humans. Humans are just one of the many branches on a tree, a branch that will one day die. One day we will be extinct. But hopefully we can avoid making lots of other things go extinct in the process, right? So if you ever hear someone say, well, if humans evolved from monkeys, why are there still monkeys? Well, that's an ignorant question. I mean, some people might not know, but you can say, oh, well, we didn't evolve from chimpanzees. We share a common ancestor with chimpanzees. It's kind of like saying, well, if dogs evolved from wolves, why are there still wolves? Well, they're on different branches here. One branch leads off of another. One branch coming off doesn't destroy the original branch. It kept evolving. Chimpanzees have been evolving just as long as we have. Our branches diverged and went off on their separate ways. The earliest fossils placed in our genus, Homo, are those of Homo habilis, and that's a little over, well, around 2.4 to 1.6 million years ago. So that's our genus, Homo. Homo being, like meaning same or us, basically, or man. And stone tools have been found with Homo habilis, and so its name really means handyman if you translate the Latin, handyman, because it was one of the earliest tool makers that we know of. Neanderthals, another one you will have heard of, Homo neanderthalis, lived in Europe and out to the Near East. You can see the range on this map. They didn't live really in Africa, but they spread out they died out 28,000 years ago. Once again, I'm sorry the text got covered up here, but they had thicker bones, they had larger brains than modern humans, and they did make art and things like that. Here's the artist's representation or scientific representation of what Neanderthals probably looked like. They lived in the cold, a lot of them anyway, lived in the cold climates of like Europe, for example, and they had bigger noses that would have been better at warming up air as they breathed. They had, different shaped foreheads and things like that. But what's cool is here's another person dressed up like a Neanderthal with a Homo sapien girl. We know that humans, Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalis, mated because we can find evidence of that in our DNA. So, for example, I have 263 Neanderthal variant of genes in my DNA. Okay, I have Neanderthal in my blood. I have less than most Europeans, but I do have some. And you can see that I also have a little bit of sub-Saharan African DNA in my DNA, and I have some Southern European, Eastern Europeans, my biggest group from the Czechoslovakians, and I have some German and British. So nowadays you can spit in a cup and find out where your ancestors are from. It's pretty cool. But I want to point out that modern humans have Neanderthal in their DNA, except for folks from the continent of Africa. You don't see much Neanderthal DNA there because Neanderthals never went to Africa. Humans met up with Neanderthals as they left Africa. So Homo sapiens appears on the planet around 195,000 years ago-ish. We're all descended from those those African ancestors. And even today, the highest amount of genetic diversity within the human species is found in Africa. Different populations in Africa are more distantly related to each other than, let's say, like I would be to them, right? So human genetic diversity is highest in Africa, and that's the founder effect, right? Only a few groups left Africa way back in the day. And so they're not a representation of all of the genetic diversity that we used to have and that we still have in the case of native Africans there. So a few left Africa, interbred with Neanderthals, spread out around the world. Some did not leave Africa. We're all still the same species. We all can still interbreed, of course. And we've been around as a species at least 195,000 years ago as a modern species. As a genus, we've been around longer, over 1 million years. But what's interesting is we as humans are very visual, right? We like to think of things in terms of what we can see. Groupings by humans, when humans try to group themselves, we often do it by skin tone. And you can see here skin pigmentation and where people are natively from, right? If you're from near the equator, often darker skin color. But if you compare people by genetic similarity, you'll see that Africans and Europeans are super closely related, right? Just like how Eastern, very Eastern, kind of the Asian continent down over this way is closely related to Native Americans, right? So if we look at DNA, we can see that a lot of us are a lot more closely related than our eyes try to tell us we are. So we've looked at a whole bunch of these different groups, sharks all the way up to birds. Make sure to check out that video on your inner fish, and I really recommend watching all three: your inner fish, your inner reptile, your inner monkey. It'll cover all of this stuff and show you neat visual representations at the same time. But make sure you pay attention to the importance of the amniote, the amniotic egg. So we have an amnion in the womb, right? There are good pictures of this in your book. Flesh out these lectures with the textbook. I can't record everything I would talk about if I had tons of time. This video is already too long. So watch these videos, read the book, answer the guided reading questions, quiz yourself as much as possible. Exam 3 will cover everything we've done online up to this lecture, including this lecture. Okay? Unless something changes by then. I'm recording this early, but that's the plan at this time. All right, thanks everybody. Good luck with everything. We'll pick up with, what are we doing next? Ecology. And ecology will be new material on the final exam.